Very first booster that he opens. Sumblewold Stag being an early standout uncommon, but ooh, there's also Emrakul. Well, that's a potentially sweet card to have, but 13 mana, still a lot. Even if you have Delirium, would cost 9 mana. That's a lot for a game of Limited. Sure, you can take it first and possibly draft a deck around it, but it would come at the expense of a premium uncommon in Sumblewold Stag. I think Emrakul is possibly better than some of the best commons, but Sumblewold Stag is such a powerful card. A 4-3 for 5 that shoots down an opposing creature is an excellent deal, and Seth Manfield chooses it over the powerful Emrakul.
Yeah,
That said, we may actually see Emrakul sometime later in one of these top 8 matches.
yeah, 4-3 effectively some of the time acting as a Flame Tongue Kavu or a Shriekmaw, if you will, just killing off a creature when it comes into play. Choking Restraint's getting shuffled to the front here of pack 2. A solid removal spell, though it is one that he's just passed, so it might be sending slightly mixed signals. It's still fairly early though, so he's got options there.
Yeah, other options are Red Griff in blue. There's not much in the way of green to stick with his first pick, and arguably, when you're in doubt, just take the removal card. That never works out badly. Choking Restraints, the best, well, perhaps it's the best common in Eldritch Moon, and the pick for Seth Manfield. So starting off with a green and a white card. As you mentioned, he did send white cards to his left at first, but we'll see what the next boosters bring.
So Desperate Sentry there, we're getting shuffled to the front initially, an Ingenious Scarb.
Ingenious Scarb is an excellent card. There's not much else in the booster. If he wants to stick with white or green, the best options are Desperate Sentry or Woodcutter's Grid. Not really exciting cards to take early. Ingenious Scarb, although it may not fit well in the colors of his first 2 picks, it's one of the best 3 drops in the format, at common even. 2-3 for 3 would already be fine, and 2 excellent abilities on top of that. Now Seth is finding his footing a little bit early on. A green card, a white card and a blue card, but he'll just read the signals and eventually find out which colors he is supposed to be.
Worth noting that at this point, Seth Manfield's made top 8 without ever drafting or playing in sealed any colour combination other than red-black. So already he's on a departure from what he's been doing thus far. Taking a look through and not necessarily seeing too much in this pack here, at least in the colours he's in. Guardian of Pilgrim's his choice there. A solid defender. If he can get to Delirium, it gets a little bit better.
No, it's just a 2-2 for 2 mana that gives a small, small boost when it enters the battlefield. Not exciting, but perhaps the best card in the pack. So now 2 white cards, meaning that Seth may venture into white. But then again, this is a booster without any premium white cards. The best cards are Board Hostility, which is in a color he's not in yet, and Exultant Cultist would be another blue card. He doesn't have any emerge creatures to power out with it yet, but still a fine pickup. So this looks to be one of the boosters that was initially replaced by another due to a problem with the card, so that's why it's a different color and hence Seth's hesitation, but all good.
Yeah, all working out just fine there. Another copy of Ingenious Scarb. That a nice sign for him that he may well have moved towards the correct colour here. An extra blue card here, and as we've already noted, a rather powerful one. The clue is in the name there, or in the flavour text, sorry, head and shoulders above the rest. And I think that's pretty accurate when it comes to how Ingenious Scab plays out in terms of blue commons.
Yeah, not sure how good of a strategy drafting by flavour text is in the top 8 of a Grand Prix, but hey, Seth is, well, probably not because of the flavour text, but so far it's been working out. And now Tethered Hunter. That's a good 2-drop for a semi-aggressive blue deck. There's also Enlightened Maniac, but he doesn't have any emerge creatures to power out with it yet, so I like the Tethered Hunter as the pickup there. Blue appears to be open, and Seth, after just picking cards in different colors in the first couple of boosters, looks to be settling slowly but steadily into blue, with white or green as the 2 options.
Yeah, Borrowed Grace, kind of going to be a nice one if he does find himself going this sort of aggressive blue-white tempo role. Lets him pump up his whole team, even without Escalate, +2 power, fairly big. And if you do get to escalate it, well, I mean, it sometimes gets called the white overrun.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And now a Spectral Reserve. That's a late certain death going around the table, but does Seth really want to venture into a potential 4th color or solidify with another white card? Looks like he's going for the safe route of Spectral Reserves.
And
blue-white, it looks to be
comboing very well, of course, with that Borrowed Grace. Make a couple of white flyers. They're going to be tricky to block and then pump up their power.
And that's a Fatebearer Paladin being added to his pile. 4 power, 4 toughness rather. That's a good defender for any blue-white deck with a bunch of flyers.
2 real options for him here. Thraben Standard Bearer or Contingency Plan, but it looks like he's saying this late in the pack he's just going to take cards that he doesn't want anyone
none
else
of these
to
cards are really playable. Providence, maybe. It's not a great card. Life Gain never really at its best in a game of Limited. Actually goes for the Iron Rites Cleansing as a sideboard option against artifacts or enchantments.
Yeah, Iron Rite Cleansing. It's not going to be a card you're ever going to want to main deck, but occasionally you might find that there's an enchantment or an artifact there that you just really need to deal with. And if there's a few, that's the point where it becomes a really solid sideboard card.
Yeah, after his first pick, Sumblewold Stack, Seth never saw another good green card. So he has been just reading the signals. He was passed some white, some blue, and he picked up on that. And so far, these seem to be the right colors for his seed, as his deck is shaping up quite nicely.
Yeah, looking to be a comparatively aggressive build of the blue-white deck, able to leverage efficient creatures on the ground and then flying spirits to finish things off. Might make it quite tricky for opponents to defend against.
Yeah, so far it's looking fine. A decent curve of some 2-drops, a bunch of 3-drops. There's at least a 4-drop and a 5-drop, so a relatively flat curve so far, but that's a good thing. As well as a Choking Restraints and a Borrowed Grace as tricks and or removal spells. So a good mix of cards, a good mana curve, a mix between creatures and non-creature spells. He looks to be in colors that are at least relatively open for his seed, so things are going quite fine for Seth Manfield so far. And again, if he manages to win this Grand Prix, he will lock up the Grand Prix Master slot for the World Championships. If he doesn't manage to win, well, Brian Braun-Duin will be able to get his invite to that big tournament.
So checking out pack 2 here, immediately pulls a Wharf Infiltrator to the front. That one, a very powerful card indeed.
Oh yeah, I like that one. It reminds me of Looter Ilkor, for those of you who have been playing back when Time Spiral was legal. It's effectively unblockable most of the time, and then you get to loot, draw a card, discard a card, improve on card quality, and even better, if you discard any creature card at all, you can improve it into a 3/2 Eldrazi token. So you actually may get card advantage with this card, and the incidental points of damage can also add up. And obviously there's kind of a risk that the opponent has a small blocker for it, but that doesn't happen all that often. Skulk definitely helps on a 1-power creature.
Something I learned during this tournament, if you happen to have 2 copies of Wharf Infiltrator in play, and that's something Eduardo Sage-Gallic managed, then when you discard a creature card, you can pay 2 with both of them and make 2 tokens because that's they both insane. Trigger.
So another decent evasive 2-drop in Tethered Haunter there. There's also a Geist of Lonely Vigil, more defensive card. Bloodhole Priest, as you mentioned, Seth was in black-red all weekend, but not this draft. These are 2 colors that he is not in currently.
Yeah, the Haunter, clearly not made for blocking, but if you want to get stuck in the air, it's pretty solid. A little bit dangerous in the face of a lot of other spirits, but at the moment it looks like there's not too much competition for white, at least in Seth's part of the table, so it may well be that Tattered Haunter able to do the business.
Yeah, it's a pretty aggressive white-blue deck that Seth is drafting so far. Not a big late game, but plenty of early creatures. Seems to be that Sigarden Priest is a good pickup for him. There's also a Drogskull Shieldmate in the pack, but just having the opportunity of playing a turn 2 Sigarden Priest, locking down the best, non-human creature on the other side of the table for the remainder of the game is a pretty good effect to have. It's kind of a removal skill that scales into the late game.
Yeah, the Guardian Priest, it can deal with any non-human creature, and it can always deal with the best non-human creature each turn, so it's not like one of your pacifism effects that gets stuck on one creature. Yes, it costs you a bit of mana, but mana worth spending.
Lashweed Lurker, well, if he had gone blue-green that would be nice, but he's now solidly in white-blue. There were a bunch of decent cards for him. Identity Thief, that's, it would fit with his aggressive deck. He has plenty of 2-drops and 3-drops, so Identity Thief, taking out the best creature on the other side of the table, becoming it, attacking for a bunch. It fits his strategy. Yeah, if the way Set's deck is currently shaping up, if he goes into a long game, he will not have an advantage. But in the early game and in the mid game, his deck is quite powerful so far. Identity Thief, a good fit.
So Enlightened Maniac there getting pulled to the front. It looks like there's a foil copy and an sorry, not a non-foil copy as well. The other one there is Spontaneous Mutation.
Yeah, that's a nice trick, but Set doesn't have a lot in the way of getting cards into the graveyard. So just a Guardian of Pilgrims being the pickup. Another aggressive card. He, well, it fits with the Identity Thief, fits with the theme of his deck so far.
And another Faithbearer Paladin if he wants it here. That kind of almost a curve topper for the sort of deck that he's trying to build here. He's going low to the ground, he's going aggressive, but the fact that it gains him a bit of life means that if he finds himself in a straight up aggro mirror, his flyers typically aren't going to be quite as large as ground creatures, so having a bit of life gain there, not going to hurt.
Yeah, and the Paladin with 4 toughness, that is the size you want to be in this format. Plenty of 3/2 creatures in Eldritch Moon, not to mention the 3/2 Eldrazi tokens, so it blocks well. Oh, Fortune's Favor. I love the mind games that this card presents. It is roughly on par with Inspiration as a card, because typically you'll just get 2 decent cards out of the deal. Not great, especially not for Set's deck, but there's not much else in the booster really. Hating Borrowed Hostility. That's fine if he's sure that he's not going to play the Fortune's Favor, even though at an instant it could pump his Ingenious Scarps, taking and hating the Borrowed Hostility is okay.
So Enlightened Maniac, a 4-mana 3/2 with the extra body. Not necessarily incredible for Manfield here, but not too many other options if he wants to stay on color. Takes the Enlightened Maniac and carries on with the draft. We're a little over halfway through here, just sort of tailing out the Eldritch Moon pack. We see a Convolute is the one card on color here. We'll see whether or not he goes with that, or perhaps an Abundant Maw that could undo all of his good work trying to hit opponents' life totals. Does take the counter spell.
Yeah, it's better to counter an opposing Abundant Maw rather than taking it yourself. Not much here. Yeah, could hate a Swift Spinner, which is pretty good against all of his 2/1 flyers.
Yeah, the Lunar Force is unlikely to make any main decks in this draft. It's a little bit of a tricky one to really employ at its best in Limited. Sees Displace, and there's another copy of Ride Down there. There seem to have been a few Ride Downs in this draft. It'll be interesting to see where those find a home, if there is a red-white drafter. The fact it's gone this late means that maybe there isn't. Thraben Standard Bearer, this might be the time to take it. Having won, not the end of the world.
It's okay, especially with Borrowed Grace. Not a high pick, or like it's a card that won't often even make it into your deck, but might as well take it here. Note that Ben Stark was to the right of Set Manfield, so if Ben Stark is in red-white, he would be getting some late gifts in Ride Down. We'll see later on during the top 8.
Yeah, I mean, it could be tricky if Ben is in white at least, because it means that those two fighting a little bit for colours. Though enough good blue cards here for Seth Manfield that I certainly don't think that the quality of his deck has been harmed if there is that little bit of conflict with one of his neighbours. Yeah, a couple of copies of Guardian of Pilgrims just means that he's going to be able to have these aggressive starts of starting out perhaps with a flyer, then pumping it up, getting stuck in. Yeah, a nice selection of Tattered Haunters if he wants to go to the air. And I think that this is going to be a deck that's going to be able to surprise a few people, because it has got quite a lot of flyers going on.
It looks like a good example of a solid white-blue deck so far. He will always, well, assuming that he finds an opening hand with some islands and some plains, be able to put down a good curve of creatures and put a lot of pressure on his opponent.
Yeah, not every deck in this format is known for being able to deploy lots of 2-drops. That's certainly not the problem that Seth Manfield's going to be facing. So he opens up pack 3, takes a look through, and immediately shuffles the rare to the front, or the flip rare, should I say. Startled Awake. It's not really doing what he wants to be doing, though. Pour Over the Pages may be a better fit. And actually, even looking at Strength of Arms, the combat trick, he's a little short on combat tricks, so Strength of Arms may find itself being a good pickup somewhere, though. As a first pick, it's not a super exciting one.
Startled Awake can just win the game by itself, and if this were first pick for spec, I would expect that this would be the pick, But it doesn't really fit Seth Manfield's strategy so far. He has a super aggressive deck, so then adding a mill card would add like a completely different line of attack to his deck that doesn't really fit. As you mentioned, Strength of Arms will fill kind of a hole in his deck so far, and it is in the form of combat tricks. Especially nice with his ingenious scarps for the prowess trigger. So a good example of Seth adjusting his valuations of cards depending on the type of deck that he is drafting. Strength of Arms going well with his aggro deck.
Stitch Mangler, Hope Against Hope. There's a few good ones for him here. The Mangler, another tempo play that could work out rather well, tapping down one blocker. Hope Against Hope on one of his flyers might just create a gigantic creature.
Yeah, he doesn't have a lot of interaction yet, mostly a bunch of early drops. I think Stitch Mangler fits well as another way to interact with his opponent and make sure that he is able to set up reasonable attacks. These are not exciting first picks from Shadows over Innistrad. The Pump Spell and Stitch Mangler cards you are more hoping to pick 5th pick, 6th pick. So Seth is not going to be too happy with this, but his deck is still okay.
Apothecary Geist, it almost certainly will gain him a little bit of life given the amount of other spirits he has going on top of being a 2/3 flyer itself. Tooth Collector, a card that he needs to be a bit worried about because he has a fair number of creatures with 1 toughness. But ultimately, this is not the time in the draft to be hate drafting. If there's a solid card for your deck, you kind of want to take it. 4 mana 2/3 flyer is not an exciting rate, but it will do good work for him. And with all of his other flyers, it seems pretty solid.
Oh, and there's a Spectral Shepherd. That fits well in, well, obviously blue-white. It's another spirit, so that would allow him to gain some life with Apothecary Geist. Hey, he can even bounce some of his spirits for value. And a 2/2 flyer, even without any abilities, is a good deal for 3 mana and fits the aggressive team with some flyers that his deck is currently, looking like.
Yeah, plenty of Dawn Gryphs would get played by Seth Manfield in this deck if he had them. Spectral Shepherd is a strict upgrade on that.
Ooh, there's a Nephalia Moondrakes. That's super expensive though, and the ability of giving a creature flying, not that valuable for his deck. So yeah, Survive the Night may actually be a better fit. His curve is low. Adding a 7-drop may not be exactly what you want, whereas some kind of combat trick Seth still has plenty of ground creatures, would allow him to leverage the early assaults that he will be putting on. I like Survive the Night here. Good pickup by Seth Manfield.
Yeah, that's quite a disciplined pick. I'm not sure it's where everyone, especially with less experience of the format, would go. When there's that many blue cards and especially blue flyers, you might be tempted to go elsewhere. But Jace's Scrutiny, an interesting one for Seth Manfield here. A nice trick again, another way of investigating and potentially holding off the larger creatures that some of the more to the ground decks might be packing. -4 power until the end of turn. A very solid trick, and the Investigate doesn't hurt neither.
Yeah, nothing wrong with putting this in your deck. Again, not a high pick, but just fine. Well, there's the card that he actually first picked out of this pack once again. Strength of Arms. Would be quite ironic if he takes it here as well. There's also a Gold Knight Castigator, which is fine, but no point in hate drafting it when there's a Strength in Arms that is almost certainly going to make its way into Seth Manfield's deck. Yeah, it's just so ironic that this is his first pick out of the pack as well.
Yeah, no need to worry about having equipment, particularly in this deck. He's more just concerned with keeping things going, keeping his smaller creatures active and indeed alive should they tumble in a fight. So we've got another Survive the Night, a Daring Sleuth, a potential option here.
Yeah, he has some Investigate cards. Does go for Survive the Night. Well, at this point he has plenty of combat tricks, so it looks like he doesn't really need to have more of those, but well, all of these will help with his overall strategy. There's a Startled Awake just coming all the way back. Still not a great fit for his deck, so just goes for Ghostly Wings. He could put it on, say, a 2/2 for 2 mana, or say an Ingenious Scarp to start attacking for even more in the air.
Yeah, the Scarb would certainly be very happy to be flying on over. So Invasive Surgery, not really a pick here. Hope Against Hope could be kind of interesting, but instead just chooses to take a gigantic monster from someone else's deck. Doesn't really want to have to worry too much about that.
Yeah, so far Seth's deck is filled with small creatures, meaning that removal spells from opponents are not going to be all that powerful. You don't want to give them even better targets by putting auras on your creatures.
Press for Answer's the pick there, and a Deny Existence. These are kind of nice little late pickups for him. All good tempo plays for what is clearly a tempo deck. This is not necessarily a deck that's looking to win by miles. It's going to win by inches, but potentially every single time, because lots of flyers getting in for incremental points of damage while just hampering what your opponent's doing just enough to be able to win the game. Solid looking draft there from Seth Manfield. Hard to say that there are too many cards in his deck that